So Adam leads the threat intelligence line of business, tracking criminals, state-sponsored, and nationalist cyber adversary groups across the globe. So with that, I will turn this over to Adam, and I think he has some slides for us as well. All right, Adam, all yours. You're still muted, Adam. Got it.
There we go. Can you just give me a thumbs up that you can see my slides? I'm in presentation view.
We can.
Yes, perfect. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and once again, I find myself in the enviable position of briefing just before everybody goes out for some socializing. So I'll try to keep this interesting and entertaining as possible, so that we send you off to a happy hour or wherever y'all are going after this for on a good note. So, Adam Myers here. My background is that I've been with Crowdstrike since we launched the company back in 2011. Prior to that, I did about 10 years with the Defense Industrial Base, working with military, civilian, and intelligence community partners across the U.S. federal government. And I spent a few of those years working with diplomatic security on cyber threat, tracking down threat actors, bad guys, and been doing the same thing here at CrowdStrike ever since we launched the company. When we launched the company, it was a bit of a departure from the popular thinking at the time, 10 years ago, almost 11. Groups tend to be focused very much on, at the time, malware and what the threat from that malware was and how it would manifest inside of their environment. And our goal was to start to bring the community's attention to the fact that malware isn't operating independently. There's a human driving it. And if you understand who those humans are, how they operate, then you're in a better position to defend against them. And that was really the approach that we took to all the threats that our customers now encounter. And at the time, there was a lot of pushback about, well, you know, this is really the government's realm. You shouldn't be doing attribution. And to that, what we said was, well, we're not really focused on attribution right away. We're thinking about motivation. And when we think about threat actor motivation, there's really three primary motivations that we're tracking. The first, nation state. This is groups that work at the behest of a foreign government. They conduct espionage, but they also conduct sabotage, disruptive and destructive operations. And in the case of North Korea, they also conduct financially motivated activity in order to generate revenue. The second motivation that we track is what we call e-crime. And this is coin-operated in the last several years. This is heavily transitioned from botnets and attack against credentials and stealing bank account information, credit card information, moving into ransomware. And in the last year, we've seen a massive influx of these threat actors moving to data extortion. The e-crime ecosystem, the threat landscape is changing today. And we're seeing that these threat actors have recognized that organizations are less likely to pay a ransom demand to get cryptographic key material back. And as a result, the threat actor has started stealing information and threatening to disclose it. They've keyed into the fact that the legal and regulatory issues that come with that are going to far outpace what a ransom demand would be. And last year we saw an 82% increase in threat actors that began engaging in data extortion in lieu of or in addition to traditional ransomware. We also track hacktivist threat actors under, this is really all things nationalist, hacktivist, terrorist. This ranges from geopolitical issues to environmental issues to things related to social justice issues here in the United States. It varies very widely. And as I'll get into in a minute, we've seen a huge uptick in this activity vis-a-vis the conflict in Ukraine. Now, all of the threat actors we track, we use a cryptonym system, and I'll be using that throughout this presentation. So if I refer to something as Spider, Anything spider means that it's a criminally motivated threat actor. I'm sure you all are familiar with like Indrik Spider, who the principal there is a gentleman by the name of Maxim Yakubits, operates with Evil Corps, and they were actually sanctioned by OFAC. We track that as Indrik Spider. And each one of these spiders has different set of activity, different operations that they conduct, different TTPs. China we track under Panda. They're engaged in quite a bit of economic espionage. Iran under Kitten. North Korea under Cholima. Russia under Bear. Pakistan and India under Leopard and Tiger, respectively. Activist under Jackal. South Korea under Shadow Crane. Vietnam under Ocean Buffalo. They conduct economic espionage as well as traditional espionage and target dissidents. New entrants to this in the last year, Turkey, which we track under the name Cosmic Wolf, and Colombia, which we track under the name Galactic Ocelot. This problem is getting bigger and bigger every single year. We see more and more entrants to this space, whether it be nation state or criminally motivated or hacktivist. And there's more threat actors that are getting involved in offensive cyber operations. Now, we track over 185 of these threat actors here at CrowdStrike. That doesn't mean that they all have the same threat level. And so we look at their capabilities, things that they can do, and the intentions, things that they want to do, in order to understand what the true threat is for an organization. So here I've kind of mapped this out based off of a general Western kind of perspective. And you can see that the big three that most organizations need to be concerned about here in the US are China, Russia, and North Korea. Iran, in the last several years, beginning in 2019, has increased in their intentions. Their capabilities have not moved in one direction or the other significantly, but their intentions have. The tanker wars in the Straits of Hormuz in 2019, the targeted killing of General Qasem Soleimani, the dissipation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the so-called nuclear deal, has driven Iran into focus and targeting against Western entities more than they had. They'd been focused on regional entities, the Saudis, the Emirati, things related to the conflict in Yemen. But as these things have increased, we've seen Iran's intentions as well increase. So moving to recent kind of history, I think everybody's really focused on what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. And obviously this has been an extremely important activity going back to January. But the conflict and the cyber aspects of this conflict really started right after the Euromaidan protests back in 2013. We started to see targeting of energy and transportation organizations, targeting of media outlets. In that instance, they actually had hacked into the Central Election Committee of Ukraine and attempted to make it look as if a far right-wing candidate was going to win. And so if that sounds familiar, the Nazification rhetoric that the Russians used as justification for the conflict today really started way back then in 2015. And it was a coordinated activity where they were going to put fake information onto the CEC's server, and Russian media would amplify that message. The SBU, the Ukrainian intelligence services, allegedly stopped that, but the Russian media never got that message, and they ran the story as if it had that the attack had been successful. They turned off the power in Ukraine back in 2015, as well as in 2016. And in 2016, when they did this, we start to see the origin of some of the deniability operations that the Russian actors have run. In that, they actually attempted to look as they portrayed that they were a hacktivist group known as F Society. If that sounds familiar to anybody, that's because it was taken directly from Mr. Robot, the television show, and they even used the same imagery from that television show in the in the kind of remnants that they left behind during that attack. They also attempted to make it look as if it was a ransom attack, and this was really the first foray into that, which a year later escalated into the deployment of several tools through a supply chain compromise and this was a product called MEDoc, which is something that I kind of equate as being the the Quicken or the TurboTax of Ukraine. They deployed 3 malicious payloads through this update mechanism. One of them, known as NotPetya, resulted in over $10 billion in damages globally and impacted U.S. companies. In fact, days after the attack in June of 2017, there were comments from NATO wondering if that would actually trigger Article 5. And so this is that was a pretty significant event when that happened. For all of this activity and beyond, we've seen activity since then, has been attributed to a group that we track as Voodoo Bear. Voodoo Bear is known to be Military Unit 74455 of the GRU, the Russian Main Intelligence Directorate. And their primary operations are meant to degrade, delegitimize, or to influence public trust in state institutions and industry sectors in target countries. They've been very focused on Ukraine, but as we look today at the potential horizontal movement of that conflict into other areas, this is something that we're very keenly concerned about in terms of targeting against Western or U.S. targets. And the timeline running up to the conflict here is pretty interesting. On 14 January, a series of website defacements against Ukrainian government targets occur. Those website defacements in Russian, Ukrainian, and Polish effectively said to Ukrainians that all of their information had been stolen, that they had no way to restore it or to recover it, and it's about to become public. You should be afraid and wait for the worst. This is psychological warfare. They're trying to put fear into the people of Ukraine and get them to maybe weaken their resolve to resist if there is a military conflict. They talk about Volin and the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, Galicia, Policia, and various historical lands in an attempt to make it look as if this is the work of Polish operators, I believe. And at the same time, that occurred with a wiper attack. And this wiper erased systems across the Ukrainian government. And this was something that was known as Whispergate, which we track to a threat actor today that we call Ember Bear. They use pretty low sophisticated tools, e-crime tools, in order to conduct operations. And this was a pretty significant event for them to do a wiper attack and these defacements concurrently. On the 22nd of January, a persona started to pop up in underground forums and tried to vend information that was allegedly stolen from these different databases within Ukraine. They ultimately just made them publicly available as well. So this was a information operation meant to make it look as if criminal actors had perpetrated the Whispergate incident. The timing of these attacks is really interesting. The Whispergate tools were being compiled and built beginning around 10 January 2022. And this corresponds with the start of diplomatic talks between the U.S. and Russia, bilateral meetings that were occurring. At the end of those bilateral meetings, the wiper and the defacement attacks occur. Now, I think personally that there's a potential that the Russians intended to begin the conflict in mid-January, and that something happened at that meeting that caused them to rethink that, but nobody told the cyber team that they had changed the plan. And as a result, they ran the operation. And I'll come back to this in a second, why I think that. But you can see here that they clearly were building it at the beginning of the talks, and they ran the operation at the end of the talks. Ukraine didn't take this sitting down. They've been very active in targeting Russian cyber operations. Here's an example from around that time period where they were shutting down fake accounts and troll factories. Now, on the 15th of February, we see a blended operation. In this instance, a series of DDoS attacks targeting Ukrainian financial institutions occur at the same time as a text message campaign that was telling people that the ATM services were out of order and that people couldn't use ATMs across Ukraine. This if you think about, you got a text message from your bank telling you that nothing was working, you're probably going to go to the bank's website to see what's going on. And as soon as you do that, you see the bank's website is down, and you know that there's 190,000 Russian troops surrounding your country, you're probably going to panic. And so, again, this is an element of psychological warfare meant to kind of wear down the Ukrainian resistance movement. And on 23 February, another wiper attack occurs. And interestingly, this is likely the work of Voodoo Bear. This is a much more sophisticated attack. We track it as Drive Slayer. It had the ability to self-propagate with a tool known as Hermetic Wizard. And this, there was a defacement campaign that used the exact same imagery from the 14 January campaign. So this is now, again, the first in a series of cyber operations that occur directly before or in concert with kinetic operations, because within several hours of those attacks occurring, the invasion began. And I'll talk about this. There's some interesting numbers here. So since that conflict has began, Crowdstrike Intelligence has tracked 6 different adversaries or activity clusters targeting Ukrainian entities. We've observed 7 unique destructive malware families that were engaged, but I think the most interesting number here is 2. 2 is the number of minutes between Vladimir Putin's address about the start of the conflict, the special military operation, and satellite disruptions impacting the KA-SAT network in Europe. This denial of service attack was first reported on 24 February, and it targeted, as I said, the KA-SAT network operated by Viasat. It impacted modems across Europe, lasted over 18 days. There were reports coming out of Germany of equipment that was failing, things like wind turbines and other critical services. The Ukrainian government made an official statement basically saying that there was significant communication loss at the beginning of the war. This was likely meant to degrade their command and control infrastructure. Subsequently, Acid Rain Wiper was identified, which was likely responsible for wiping of these satellite modems. Now, as the conflict starts, there's a crippling set of responses, and many of them were not a surprise. The U.S., U.K., EU, and Canada had announced that they were sanctioning Russian banks, that they would be cut off from the SWIFT network. Western energy companies, and I think this was a bit of a surprise, announced that they were withdrawing from respective joint ventures and stakes that they had in energy companies and projects across Russia. Several global shipping entities announced that they were going to suspend cargo shipment to and from Russia. And so this starts to begin a series of Western businesses extricating themselves from Russia. McDonald's, Starbucks, others all pulled out. And this really starts to impact and bring visibility to it within Russia. E-crime threat actors began to get involved pretty quickly too. They were activated, I would say. And so Wizard Spider announced that they would support Russia. Sality Spider, which is the operator of the Sality botnet, started conducting DDoS attacks against the Ukrainian forum. Various other actors kind of got involved, so we observed a number of DDoS attacks and other things. For the most part, though, the financially motivated threat actors effectively communicated that they weren't going to get involved in geopolitics, that they were strictly interested in making money and would continue to do so. This also activated the hacktivist community, and here you can see imagery from the Belarusian cyber partisans. And this is a group that was targeting rail networks in Belarusia that they believed were being used to transit Russian military equipment. They did this in a cyber component as others were doing it in a physical one. The Ukrainian government also announced that they were looking for volunteers to join hacking movements, hacking forums. Just today, we put out a blog post where we observed some threat actors deploying Docker containers to compromised Docker instances in order to run denial of service attacks against Russia. So there's been a significant amount of hacktivism that's occurring. a lot of it from people here in the U.S. In fact, so there's movements like the NB Network Battalion 65 and others. So it's been an interesting period of time where you have a kinetic conflict paired with cyber aspects that are being popularized and brought into people's homes and businesses. The war 2 months in is not going well for Russia. There's been a number of failures. There's been a lot of sanctions enacted against them. Massive humanitarian crisis, social unrest is mounting in Russia, and increased regional interest in joining NATO, with Sweden and Finland looking to get involved. This is setting the tone for reciprocatory attacks from Russia. And so, we, looking at this, have assessed that e-criminal actors will continue to operate in the short, mid, and long term opportunistically. Espionage will continue to occur as well. The Russian government, military, and political and diplomatic wings all need information about what we're thinking, about what others in the region are thinking. We've also seen an increase in Russian hacktivism. Groups like Killnet and Hacknet have been very involved. There was an arrest in the UK of a Romanian just a few days ago who's involved in this, and we're seeing in both directions hacktivism that may cause collateral impact for Western and European businesses. We are also seeing the opportunity for multi-sector attacks. The Russians have been conducting reconnaissance against various critical infrastructures and what may be the potential for a cyber attack. If they're unsuccessful in doing this in a broad scale, if they decide to do so, we believe that they'll go into more targeted attacks against individual targets where they do have access. And then we believe, low probability of kinetic attacks or sabotage against the West. And so, the guidance that we have is really around preparing for these types of activities, whether it be related to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, data extortion, as we've been seeing across the e-crime landscape, or otherwise. Some of the technologies that are making a huge difference that we've seen are things like zero trust and identity management. And that's really about verifying access to data before granting it. So kind of the opposite of trust but verify, more like verify and trust. Prepare to prevent. Threat hunting is absolutely essential. Things like the Justice SOC are critical in doing these types of operations, where they're looking at the equipment and the security tools that they have in order to actively engage threat actors as soon as they make access to a system. New technology like next-gen antivirus critical, drill operations, tabletop exercises, and then critical to all of this is threat intelligence to make sure that organizations have the information about these conflicts in order to actively defend against it. And so with that, I think we have about 5 minutes or so for some Q&A. So I wanted to open that up, and what I'll do is I'll stop my sharing and put my video up.
Sure thing. Thanks, Adam. We have a couple of questions keyed up for you. Start out with two-parter. Why are power plant controls connected to the internet, given the risk? Why aren't they controlled by verified humans?
So I assume that's related to the Ukraine information that I provided, and I think a lot of the equipment that's involved in electrical distribution and utility are geographically disparate, right? They're out in the field, and they require remote control. Otherwise, you have to staff that with a human. And a lot of these things aren't just sitting on the internet, but they have internet connectivity between them. And in theory, in this, we would differentiate that as the OT or operational technology space versus IT or information technology space. Threat actors have been able to, and I think if you follow this, you'll hear a lot of talk about threats to ICS and hackers coming in and turning off the power or blowing something up or some activity like that. And the reality is that these things are connected to the internet, but behind business systems that connectivity is required. And so the hackers come in through the business system and then get access to that operational environment.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Our next question up is, how has your organization dealt with the ever-widening vulnerabilities due to remote access to cloud services, what with workers working from home?
Yeah, so when COVID hit, that really expanded the attack surface, and not just business systems operating remotely, but a lot of people were dialing in through home computers or connecting in through home computers and leveraging VPN services or virtual desktop services. And what this has resulted in is a lot of credential theft, which is being operationalized in underground forums by e-crime operators. That is combined with, there's been a lot of vulnerabilities in remote access tools. In 2021, the number of critical vulnerabilities that were identified as coming out of China went from 2 to 12, so 6x increase. And that, the Chinese have been crowdsourcing their vulnerability development and going after these VPN concentrators and systems like that in order to secure access to sensitive environments. And so, this is really Crowdstrike. How we've been dealing with this is through our endpoint products and helping customers get the visibility to see if there is a vulnerability or a 0-day in some network appliance, a VPN appliance, for example, that you might not see what's happening on that VPN appliance, but once they get in, they still need to run their operation. They need to escalate privilege, move laterally to other systems. And in doing so, having technology like EDR helps you see that and to stop it before it turns into a more significant breach.
Great. I think we have time for at least one more question. So as you're